Top story this hour, the Hague-based chemical weapons watchdog's gotten data on Syria's toxic arsenal. This is part of the country's chemical demilitarization plan, hammered out by top Russian and U.S. diplomats last week. RT's Paul Scott reports.
Well, under the deal brokered between Washington and Moscow in Geneva last weekend, Syria has until Saturday to disclose its arsenal of chemical weapons, and the process has begun. The Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW for short, a spokesman for that organisation says, "We have received part of the verification and we expect more." That's what the spokesperson was quoted as saying. It's believed that the initial declaration outlining Syria's chemical weapons programme has been handed over. However, when contacted by RT, OPCW did confirm that a meeting on Syria that was scheduled for Sunday has been postponed. No reason was given and no future date has been set. Now, it's believed that Syria has 1,000 tons worth of chemical weapons dotted around the country, making it logistically difficult for this process to be carried out. President Bashar al-Assad was quoted in midweek saying that the process could take over a year, just about over a year. Of course, under that deal struck in Geneva, Syria has until the middle of 2014 to complete the process. Well, the United Nations are set to discuss a possible UN resolution in New York next week on the Syrian crisis that will give legal backing to the deal struck in Geneva. However, the two sides have slightly different views on the wording of that possible resolution, with the United States, Britain and France keen for the threat of military intervention to be on the table, to remain on the table if Damascus fails to comply with the UN resolution. Russia are saying that any threat of military intervention is counterproductive and not needed in the initial resolution. Russia says that only if Damascus fails to comply should the matter then be taken back to the United Nations. Well, those discussions are due to take place in New York next week, but the early signs are that Damascus is keen to comply with that deal struck in Geneva last weekend.
In Syria, al-Qaeda-linked groups, which by some estimates make up half of the anti-Assad forces, have turned against their more moderate rebel allies. Although there's now a truce, earlier this week radicals pushed the Free Syrian Army out of a village they controlled. But security expert Gregory Copley says there's never actually been a conventional civil war in Syria.
I think we've got an artificial civil war, and it has been so for the past couple of years, when we had Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey, backed by the United States, putting in essentially foreign elements to trigger what was believed a civil war, and they've caused massive chaos there. There was not a civil war there to begin with. Certainly there was discontent with Bashar al-Assad's government by many elements of the population, but largely this was not a civil war which was naturally occurring. And if you remove the foreign elements and the foreign funding, there wouldn't be a civil war there today. The reality is that the Assad administration had no use for chemical weapons at this stage. They were winning the war. They had the war won. They didn't need to use chemical weapons. And the only people that needed to use chemical weapons were the opposition, who were losing. And we've seen plenty of evidence as to what weapons they used in terms of the kitchen sarin, the amateur-grade sarin, if you like, in several instances around the country and historically.
It seems that al-Qaeda-affiliated brigades are being boosted from within. Also, hundreds of rebels have declared their loyalty to such groups in northern and eastern Syria. RT's Maria Finoshina has more on the consequences of rising extremism after she visited an ancient Christian village of Malula, which hasn't yet recovered from a siege.
The Syrian village of Ma'alula is where the Aramaic language, believed to have been spoken by Jesus Christ, was in daily use. But not so much these days. After jihadists attacked this mostly Christian village in Syria more than 2 weeks ago, local residents were forced to flee the battlefield that was once their native land and calm, organized life. Many of them took refuge with Christian families in old Damascus. We tried to meet them. Only the third house opens its doors for us. Many refuse to talk because their relatives remain missing. They say Islamists kidnap people, and they fear this could put them in even more danger. And these people know well about danger. 3 members of Antoinette's family were killed on the first days of the Ma'alula siege.
We were woken up in the morning by their shouts of Allah Akbar, closed the doors and all gathered in one room. They told us, surrender and we won't harm you. Antoine, Mikkel and Shadi went there and surrendered. They pointed their guns at them and started shooting. I was injured in my chest and elbow. One of them offered to save me, but I ignored him. Another one said, let them die.
Hundreds gathered for the funerals of the 3 men who they now call martyrs, both Muslims and Christians. The attack on Ma'loula village, Syrians say, was an attack on their country and its way of life.
What can be their aim other than to destroy all the Christians? Both Muslims and Christians live in Ma'loula, but it's surrounded by 4 or 5 Muslim villages. Maybe they see this as the last obstacle in their path.
Antoinette's father-in-law is 88 years old. He says nothing like this has happened in his lifetime.
We were living in peace, and now it seems they want to throw all the Christians out of the country. We pray to God that we'll defeat them and kick them out.
Another relative who's afraid to show her face says it's hard to say how many people were killed in Ma'loula, because militants holding the village often keep bodies for further ransom and to instill fear.
Their goal is not Assad. Their idea is to establish an Islamic emirate in all of the Middle East. However, foreign countries are helping them with weapons, money, whatever they need, helping them destroy the country and people of this region.
Special sweet sanctified bread is served in the family to commemorate the dead. In church, they held special ceremonies for several days. And again, other Syrians, equally shocked, prayed together for their dead and alive. The ancient language in Ma'loula united people for thousands of years. The hope now is that it can sustain them for a little longer. And all over the country, the 2.5-year-long conflict is taking lives, language and shattering people's hope. Marif Noshnati from Damascus in Syria.